Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and then other people can join us as they're coming in. But before we get started, Sister Toya is going to pray for us and pray over our event. Or do you want me to come over there? Okay.
This one? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to lead you all in a word of prayer. Father God, we thank you for yet another day. We thank you for bringing us through our week. We give you glory. We give you honor. Lord, as we have our Let's Talk tonight, Father God, we pray that you just open up our hearts and mind, Father God, as we have an open dialogue about the race, religion, and politics. Father God, we pray that you just shed some truth, shed some light, Father God, and just let everyone speak from their heart, oh Heavenly Father God. Let us still continue to stay in your will as we continue to speak. And Lord, we just give you thanks, glory, and honor. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Okay, so my name is Akila Hughes. I'm the Community Service Liaison here at Divine Truth Christian Center. So basically how our night's going to go is I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we'll go over some housekeeping rules, and then we'll just go right into our panel. So, cool. So the first person I'm going to be introducing is Pastor Andre Martin, who is the founder and senior pastor here at Divine Truth Christian Center. In addition to serving as chaplain for the Casselberry Police Department and the vice president of South Seminole Communities Association for Progress, he is also pursuing his doctorate in theology. Pastor Martin is an unwavering believer in the power and gospel of Jesus Christ and God's article of faith, and he's happily married to Lady Martin. So, Pastor Martin, thank you for being here tonight. Next, I'm going to be introducing Megan Cottrell. Megan Cottrell has 10 years of experience as a learning and development professional. She began her career providing suicide crisis awareness and training to youth and mental health professionals after moving to Sanford with her husband in 2015. Megan enrolled in a leadership program where she realized a passion for administration and empathy as a tool for meeting community needs. In 2019, Megan graduated from the University of West Florida with a Master in Science of Administration. Since that time, she has continued to provide training and instructional design support to local organizations. So, Megan. You're welcome. Okay, so next we have Pastor Drew Taylor. Drew Taylor is the pastor of Families in Connection at Willow Creek Church. He has served in this role since May of 2017. He has a BA, a bachelor's in history from the University of Florida, and a master's of divinity from Reformed Theological Seminary. Drew is an ordained minister in the PCA domination and serves on the planning committee of the Central Florida Presbytery. Drew and his wife Becky married in 2015 and live in Casselberry, Florida. Drew serves with the Casselberry Chambers of Commerce leadership team, serves at many Casselberry city events, and recently started a podcast highlighting the positive things within the city of Casselberry titled "What's Up, Casselberry?" where he co-hosts with fellow pastor and friend Andy Sears. So, Pastor Drew. And last but not least, we have Jonathan Rosier, who is a Florida native, where he works as a professional healthcare consultant who manages systems for the healthcare industry. He inspects the efficiency, profits, and structure of the organization, then offers suggestions on methods of improvement. Jonathan received his undergraduate degree from the University of Central Florida, go Knights, and exercise physiologically, and his master's degree in health services administrations with a focus on quality improvement. After spending time with the Seminole County Health Department as a consultant, Jonathan went off to develop his own healthcare consulting firm called Dunamis Wellness Consultants that works with several Central Florida organizations to improve healthcare quality and efficiency for its employees, along with minority communities to improve their access to care. So, Mr. Jonathan. That was a lot of reading. Okay. So on to our housekeeping. There's a restroom that's located right outside of our sanctuary. We're going to have an intermission around 8 p.m. so that everyone can take a breather, go to the restroom, and then we're going to come back from our Q&A session. And the most important thing to remember is to respect everyone's space and opinions. It's okay to have different opinions. It's okay. And yeah, that's really all. So we can start and have a great night. So my first question for the night, and anyone can jump in and answer the question, is how do you define racism?
I guess I'll start since everyone is really hesitant. I looked into this a lot and I felt like a lot of the definitions that I was finding had a component missing. So a lot of the core definitions I was finding were the belief that certain races hold particular traits and one race is superior to another. And I think that's a good baseline, but it's missing the dimension of discrimination. And when a lot of us think about racism, it's because it's impacting our level of power and voice. And so I would argue from more of a social inequality perspective that that racism is creating a social boundary between groups based on presumed differences, and it often confers privilege onto one group over another.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. Pastor Andre, thank you for putting this event together. Akila, you as well. Totally agree with Megan regarding there's kind of the overt, right? When I think of racism, there's the overt actions. One group of people, culture, race, putting down another. But there's a lot more to what you mentioned regarding social inequalities, things that are maybe subversive, not as obvious at the surface level, but are clearly happening. And one of the things that I hope to communicate well tonight with those watching and as well as those in the room is the reality that we were all made with dignity. We were all made in God's image, and we all share worth and value. And so when we start with that foundation, then anything where one group of people, whether it's preferences, color of our skin, et cetera, seeks to elevate ourselves above another person that's made in God's image, another person that shares the same value as everyone else. Akile, I'm like, is that God or? So it's just really important to identify from the get-go, not to make judgments and assumptions in raising kind of one culture, race above another.
Awesome. Does anyone else want to answer this question? Okay. So my next question is, do you think white privilege exists? Why or why not?
Let me chime in on that. I think racial privilege exists among all peoples. And here's what I mean by that. I think that everybody has certain cultural norms with and between ethnicities. There are, if you go around the world, there's definitely different perspectives of way people see things. I think sometimes when those questions are asked, they're asked in the American construct, but the American construct isn't the only construct that is out there. I do believe that there are norms, and people get used to norms, but what I've seen over the last several years is that it has gone away from necessarily being about skin color to more about money and class. And and to kind of piggyback on the whole idea of what is racism, there's a lot of sociology in regards to that specific definition, but it's basically one group of people having the means and the institutional fortitude to exert power over another. And sometimes as black people, we say that we can't be racist, but we can definitely be prejudiced. And I think that that's where sometimes things get kind of convoluted, and people mix those two definitions as if they're one and the same, and they're not one and the same. They're distinctly different, because you could be prejudiced about towards someone just because you can't, you know, if you can say, well, I don't want you to talk to anybody if you can't comb their hair. See? And so at the end of the day, I think that there are different types of privilege. I think that's just a new word by, a new buzzword for just having favoritism. But somebody may argue differently if you go to the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia and you see people who are terribly poor, or you go just here in Orlando and you go to Christmas, Florida, and there's people that are walking outside in trailers, and the children are dirty and barefooted, and I'm driving by in a Jaguar. So it's all about exposure and being willing to have your bubble bursted by going around different people.
Yeah, Akile, maybe it would be helpful just to kind of, so we're on the same page, like, what do you mean when you say white privilege?
White privilege
people
is
to assume anything.
Essentially the norm that a Caucasian woman or man, you have more benefits and access to certain things than minorities. That's really all that white privilege is. Or if you think about a different scenario, there are certain things that you don't have to deal with because you're white compared to what a black person may have to deal with, whether it's getting stopped by a cop or being in a store and someone is constantly following you. So that's essentially what white privilege is.
Maybe it's stereotypes.
Could be. What do you guys think?
I think I would probably build off of what Pastor Martin said, but maybe in a different way. I've had a distinct privilege of going from being a white woman to a question mark 5 years ago when I converted to Islam and started wearing a scarf. And it was a very distinct difference for me of how people treated me, how people would follow me and say things to me. And that's not to say that on a global perspective, there are not different levels of privilege, but the recognition that in America, the country has a distinct voice that comes from whiteness. That whiteness is the presumed position. And I was reading a little bit about this earlier today, and this author I was reading from, again, from more of a sociological perspective, he was saying that when he would do surveys in his classes, he would find that any non-white student he had spent significant time contemplating their place in the world because of their race. And when he would talk to the white students, they had never considered where their place in the world was, because for them it was a given that they would be able to get the things that they wanted. And they considered, in fact, race to be more of a minority issue. So I do think it conveys some level of privilege that I don't have to be worried about, is this a safe place for me to go? Well, I kind of do now. Is this a safe place for me to go? Whereas, somebody else might have to think, if I go here, is it going to cause a scene that might cost me my life at the end of the day? So to me, you really have to consider whose voices are at the table. When you think about structural systems, it has been primarily white voices creating policies and creating attitudes and atmospheres that reflect stereotypes onto the rest of the group.
Yeah, it's really well said. Jonathan, do you want to weigh in? Or?
So I do believe that white privilege does exist, but as Pastor Martin mentioned earlier, I think it has transitioned to more so what class that you're in. So when you think about white privilege, take out the aspect of what skin color you are. It's more so of, do you have the money? Do you have the nice car? Do you have the house? So I take out the aspect of white privilege and I say, white privilege does exist, but when it comes to society nowadays, white privilege has now transitioned to what class that you're in.
Yeah, that's helpful. One thing that was really formative for me, to answer the question, yes, I agree. I agree. White privilege does exist, and can think of multiple opportunities that I was afforded, not necessarily in a comparison where it was myself and a member of a minority, maybe pursuing the same position or dream potentially, but to what Megan said, just in regards to my status, the way that I've kind of been raised, frankly, and to look like I think of the common example, knowing fellow brothers and sisters of different minorities, being a college graduate, for example, is a really big deal. In my family, that was an assumed next step. After that really wasn't even a conversation of do you or should you or it was just I was raised in a way where that was just part of the next steps in your life. And so in that sense, I never really had to overcome this, do I do something new that no one else in my family has ever experienced, right? And so I definitely, more now as an adult, and knowing folks from various backgrounds and walks of life and social class, as Pastor Andre said, recognize the reality that there were certain privileges benefited to me because of how I was raised. But the analogy that was really helpful, I'm not really a baseball guy, but it was a baseball analogy, and because the question that in my church and friends and peers often have is, well, there's not the overt racism, there's opportunities given all the time now, so what's the problem? Why are people still having these types of conversations? That's what gets asked in my world and network. And the description was, well, if you're playing a baseball game and there's 9 innings, and on one side you have the, quote, white team, the other side is the team made up of minorities, well, the white team has been given every opportunity to bat, the best equipment, and they're winning the game 99-0. And we're now at the bottom of the 9th, and we're telling the other team, come up to bat, you have one arm tied behind your back, and why can't you win? Why can't you catch up to? And that was truly revolutionary to me, was it's not just okay, now we're even, but rather this is an ongoing development. I mean, these conversations are going to be years in the making. And so I'm very thankful that we're having these conversations to recognize, especially my white brothers and sisters, to understand we've been placed in the position doing nothing where we're up 99-0. Let's get others into the game, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Did you want to? Okay. So kind of going off of what you just said about how you can kind of get your white brothers and sisters to bring more people in, how do you, or everyone, how do you think the majority can use their privilege to advocate for minorities or to help bring them in?
Repeat the question.
Okay. How can the majority race use their privilege to help advocate for minorities?
I would just say, just move out the way, honestly.
Or
What
not
does that mean?
necessarily move out the way.
Well, here, let me give you the context of that. What I would say is, to put that in context, is that, hey, just let me continue pursuing my opportunities, take down preconceived notions, because that's like a loaded question. Mm-hmm. Take down preconceived notions. If I'm there to make money, if I'm there to work, if I'm there to try to pursue my dreams and goals, just let me live as a normal person, go on about my business, let me navigate my own destiny, and don't hold me back. That's it.
I agree, but also to level the playing field. because we come in a society where we feel that you have the upper hand, or when we come into the same room, someone may look at you and say, well, I'll give them an opportunity versus you because of X, Y, Z. I think when it comes to minorities, or when it comes to the majority helping out the minority, it's definitely coming in the aspect of leveling out the playing field, that everyone has that equal opportunity in order to succeed the same goal.
So when you say leveling out the playing field, what do you mean by that?
So I'll use myself as an example. When I started out looking for different jobs, I went months without working, going into these different interviews, going into these different places, and a lot of times I would get the interview based off of my name, but other times when they actually meet me, they're like, "Nah, we'll go with somebody else." So when I say level out the playing field, don't look at me in the aspect of what my name is, what my skin tone is, what my age may be. Look at me as an individual who can put out the same work ethic as the next individual.
I think that you all are being very gracious. I think that there's a lot more active role that you should expect from people who hold power and voice that you don't necessarily have, or that affects your daily life, whether you could have it or not. So you should expect people to read and learn about things that affect you. You should expect people to advocate for things that are in your best interest. So there's a big debate going on right now about natural hair, right? So I saw a post the other day of somebody that said, "Welcome to America, where black people are the only people who need a law to wear our natural hair." So it shouldn't be on, thank you, Snaps. It shouldn't be the burden of the people who are being oppressed to not only be oppressed and not have a voice, but also to step outside of that and be their own advocates. You should have, quote, allies who do the heavy lifting for you because they already have power, because they already have wealth. The most recent statistics are what white families own 6 times more wealth on average than black families. That's not saying that black families are not successful and do not work hard, because we all know that they do. But you cannot fight centuries of oppression in this small window of time and then expect that you're not going to get an active role. So imagine that this was an all-white panel here talking about race, right? Which we all know is definitely happening out in the world. Those people need to step aside and allow somebody to have voice. If you're on a board, if you have some influence in government, you need to bring in voices that are not at the table to create new policies and circumstances for people who don't have the power and voice that you have. So, go to a library, pick up some Zora Neale Hurston, go visit Eatonville, go do something to educate yourself, and don't put that burden on somebody who already has enough going on.
That was good. That very well said, and I absolutely agree. I think there's if you kind of think of quadrants, and this is not a new thought to me, but there's people that have experience, power, privilege, and then you have others who are suffering, who are, as you said, Megan, already dealing with so much, and the expectation on one level to, for those in power, I say we, as a white man, need to absolutely come down, invest in people. But to Pastor Andre's point, I think that the reality is that, and this is maybe where we will disagree, I'm not sure, but I love Habitat for Humanity's slogan, which is a hand up, not a handout. And so what I mean by that is, I think a lot of people have the assumption that, okay, the people in position of power need to give and just freely donate everything, or a chunk of, not everything, but a chunk of their influence, privilege, etc., and that will raise but I like the philosophy of investing in people. And Pastor Andre, I see you do it constantly with young men in your church and in your community where you're investing them and you're calling them up to make something of themselves, to do something. And that really is my passion and desire, is to invest in people and to provide a hand up, not simply just a hand out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand, and I think there's some things that kind of irk me a little bit. I do not believe as a black male that I need to look at the predominant race to affirm my value or worth. I believe that, as a man of God, that my God supplies all of my needs, and He is all that I need, and He's the one who opens the doors for me, whoever it may come through, and so I don't. And here's the reason why I see it this way. So, I'm 44. I'll be 45 years old this year, and so when I was in college, I went to a historically black college and university, Florida A&M University, highest on the Seven Hills. Great place, and when I first got there, I read many different books. James Baldwin, The Destruction of African Americans, The Destruction of Black Civilization. I watched the movie Sankofa, and I had professors, went to the Arquette Center, deep into certain things like that. And the way that my professors would talk to me, they would say, well, go ahead and look at every single channel. And if you look at every single channel, you'll see white person, white person, white person, white person, white person. I was like, yeah, that's the case. I said, we're in society, we're in a construct. And then the more that I would listen to them, the more that I would look around, then I started diving into the element of being more militant, more angry, more us versus them. And then I had this same type of worldview, trying to get a lot of people together, rally, being part of government organizations, when I was in college, and then I got married, and then something happened. What happened was I ended up getting a job that paid almost 4 times as much as I made in college, and I also listened to this radio show called Rush Limbaugh. Just let you know, see what the other side of the world thinks and how they see things or what have you. And then I started seeing things from a different perspective. I started hearing about these buzzwords because I studied both sides. I didn't want to be just on one side or the other side. Because if you have another person who is in St. Augustine or in Jacksonville, and they have a Star and Bars, and they're working in hot sun on a roof, call them rednecks, however you want to call it, and they're working down to the bone, and they have a conversation with a black person about certain things like this, and they would be very, very upset in that and say, this one thing, well, I didn't put you in slavery, and I worked myself to the bone, and I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth, and I just don't understand why can't people just love people. And then you would have other people from my side that would try to force them into an apology tour. And I also don't think that that is necessary as well. And so when it comes to topics like this, just as a whole, I think that people need to take a step back and just look at the things for what they are. Who can actually hold you back? Why are there so many motivational speakers and motivational coaches that are out there? Because most of what is held back, in my view, in my worldview, is ourselves. We're our own worst enemy. And I've been around white people that have helped me, and I've been around black people that have held me back. Just look at our church as an example. We're in a predominantly African-American area, and it is like pulling teeth in order to have unity when it comes to specific things, and it has nothing to do with the predominant culture. Nothing to do with that.
Can I ask, Pastor, what would you say to not only myself, but to kind of the white church, or just white individuals who have a passion for wanting to see brothers and sisters elevated? And the question is, to advocate for them. What would that look like for us?
I would just say, just have conversations. Many people have very good ways of diagnosing what is wrong, but not a solution. So I figured one of the solutions is just having a conversation and just knowing how to love a person. and love what they are and not trying to make another person change. I should be able to walk in a conservative circle or a democratic circle, because sometimes those are people's worldviews, and be able to speak to both type of people without there being hair set on fire. And I've been able to walk between both circles because I don't align myself with, things of that nature. So when I say an advocate, as far as like the white church, if you will, one of the main themes that I hear about, and I'm a part of this group called the African American Pulpit Society, and one of the main things that we hear about right now, and it's getting more of a rage, is evangelicalism. When you think about evangelicalism, some of the young people start thinking about Republicans, white Christians, the way that they use votes, abortion, homosexuality. This is their four-legged stool, and then that's all that there is. And then as black pastors, some of the predominant culture also believes that many of us have some of the same ideals, and some of us do, because it's biblical. But what we are starting to do now is, instead of just looking to Caucasian reformers such as Calvin and Arminius and some of the other theologians that are out there, now we're looking at African American or African-based theologians from the 300s to 200s in the first century in order to develop theology and things of that nature. In other words, those voices are just as valid. And so, once again, we do not have to, and I don't believe any person has to look to another race in order to find out who they are. There's much and great history between both of them. And as black people, we can't play into race play to prejudice by only looking for affirmation in the predominant culture and say, okay, they validated me, and I found a person that understands where I'm coming from, so therefore I feel good. No, I feel good with or without a person. And that seems like a bold statement, seems like an arrogant, but not really. Not really, not in my worldview. So the way that you can help and advocate is just treat me like a regular person. Let me be human.
I just want to push back on that a little bit. I think that's beautiful, but I think that there's a lot of research that shows that despite that, discrimination is severely affecting the overall health of people. For instance, a lot of research says that most children become aware of the stereotypes about them by the time that they're 7 or 8 years old, and it begins to affect their physical and mental health. And so to me, not having the expectation that their teacher or their superintendent or anybody else in their life will advocate for them or know how to accurately advocate for them is not holding people accountable to the level that they're capable of. And so that's not to say that you shouldn't love them or have empathy for them or walk through life with them, understand that you're both human, but just that there's a certain expectation that if you are responsible for your community, you understand the needs of that community and you know how to respond to them appropriately. So and maybe that's more of my role, is to hold people more accountable for the actions that they take toward having a more inclusive community or whatever that is. Because personally, I wouldn't say to a general white person on the street, yeah, just go up to somebody that you don't know much about them and just start talking to them, because the possibility of that becoming toxic and then becoming the burden of the other person is very real. And I would never advocate for somebody to just go do that without educating themselves first. Is it something that I'm doing?
No, it's always.
Okay. It's just,
Okay, good. Have you ever had to worry about racial bias? If so, can you give us an example? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes, definitely have done that. And I think I just, like I said, over the years, I think I've just kind of not blocked it out, but I just don't let it bother me. Because like I said, when you go into this perpetual state of anger, you don't make much progress. I see a lot of people that are pro whatever on Facebook, and they talk about having their own businesses and all these other different types of things, but then they become isolationists. And so I said all that to say this. There was one particular company that I worked for, I won't say the name, but I was in Connecticut, And I was shocked by this because I figured that, there is no racial or prejudiced people in Connecticut because it's up north. Because all through the years we were taught that it's down south where there's all of these racial problems at. But then I got a chance to experience up north coagula cult type racism. Coagula cult, if you don't understand that, it's the movie Get Out, just look at that and you'll see where it's coming from. That's what I call liberal, white liberal racism. All right, but I digress. So I was up there and I was working on a particular project, and I was at a round table, young people, powerful company, whatnot, and IT, and most of everybody was just collaborating back and forth. But then there's this one individual that was in there that had this mindset. I think it's the alt-right mindset that I was there because of affirmative action. I was like, no. I work for a private company. There's no set-aside or anything. He was like, well, maybe you're here just because you're black in front of the entire table. So I had two reactions in my brain. One of them was an unsaved reaction. And then the other reaction is, hey, it is what it is. I'm not going to get angry at you to the point that I stop putting food on my table. I'm just going to discard it. I talked with my manager about it. But he had the passive aggressiveness, which is say, you don't have to worry about it too much. I was like, okay. But I was kind of irked with him about it. But then my reaction was, I'm going to work even harder. And I'm going to put myself in a position to where I understand what's happened in the past, but as far as my sons are concerned, I'm going to be their biggest advocate, and I'm going to put a silver spoon in their mouth. I'm going to change the dynamic so that if they do come across these things, that they'll still be able to not feel so down and dejected. They understand it's reality, it's the truth of the matter, but you should still continue to push forward anyway. So that was my experience. There have been others. When I was at UCF, and I'll give this last example. When I was at UCF, I was in a graduate program when I was trying to find myself many years ago in healthcare administration, my master's in healthcare administration. That was before I got into IT. And I had a nice black Sebring LXI, tinted windows, low profile wheels, leather seats, very similar to the car I have right now, and I had that coming out of college. I was just happy, and had a temporary tag, and I tell you what, that temporary tag, it took me about 2 or 3 weeks before my regular tag came in, but I will tell you, I got pulled over at least 10 times within 2 weeks. 10 times. I said, well, your temporary tag shows that it's not. I was like, yes, sir, it is. It just haven't sent me the tag. So I just explained myself, and it got very irritating, but instead of getting angry about it, I did the Michelle Obama thing, and I said, well, they go low, I go high. And I just discarded, but I remember that. And so what do I do now? I talk to my sons, and I tell them this is the way that you advocate and carry yourself. However, albeit notwithstanding, if things start getting out of hand, then I know that I can pull my strings, and I know that I can deal with things in a very heavy-handed manner if necessary.
I kind of already shared my experience, but I want to add a little note to that when I first converted and started wearing a scarf, actually I was wearing a hat in the beginning because I was in Ohio and I was really nervous that someone was going to try to hurt me, right? And I got a lot of interesting threats from people. We were in like very rural areas, going out in schools and different things. And just to address the question previously about privilege, one of my coworkers was like, well, isn't that nice that you could take yours off? And it was a really big wake-up call for me that it's a privilege in and of itself to be able to step in and out of oppression, and not everybody has that option, right? You can't change how people are going to perceive you when that's your identity. So it definitely changes the whole perception of how you interact with people at that point.
Did anyone else want to answer that question? Okay, cool. Okay, so we talked a little bit about white privilege and whether it exists or not. So now I'm going to ask you whether you think black privilege exists or not.
Go ahead, Jonathan. I think that you'd be appropriate for this conversation. Go ahead.
Does black privilege exist? to a certain standpoint, I do say it exists because they have this thing out there called affirmative action, which allows, oh, excuse me, called affirmative action, where pretty much they're just allowing you to be that black person in the room. So yes, I believe that black. What's the word you just used?
Black privilege.
Black privilege exists. Yes, I do believe in that. Like I said, because of affirmative action, because it exists. Even when it comes to when I got into graduate school, there may be probably about 5 African Americans in the entire program. That's males and females. So when you look at that and you say that's a part of their affirmative action, it wasn't because of our grades, it wasn't because of our application. It's honestly because it fits their quota. So yes, it exists, but I think it's important that we change the quality of our mindset to not feed on that in order to say yes, I'm in it because I'm a black person, and use that as energy and a tool to just feed off of negative energy. So I think it's important that we use that. It's important that we use our black privilege to set up others for success.
I would say yes, it does. And you can see it basically in the 90s when we told Bill Clinton that he was the first black president. And we said that he could, when we approve of a white person, we say, you could come to the cookout now. Or another dynamic where we have, and this is this new thing, where we call it ADOS, African descendants of slavery, and the Haitian community, and how the immigrants of color from the Caribbean, from Africa, and American blacks, and how they interact with each other. Mm-hmm. So, all right, that's one part. But then here I am, and that's the undercurrent that's going on, because we have people that are immigrating to the country that are from different, that are black, but from different countries. And then the way that they perceive blacks oftentimes is very similar to the way that some white people perceive blacks. So there is black privilege that's out there, and people do show favoritism oftentimes when they agree with them. That's my opinion.
Okay. So moving on, do you think it's possible for minorities to victimize themselves?
Drink some water.
Anyone can answer this question if you like. This is a safe environment.
No, it's not. Not on the internet. Okay, I'll go ahead and jump in there. I'm like, what can man do to me? So I might as well jump into it. So I do believe that victimhood does exist. I do know that there's this thing that's called the poverty mindset. We taught about it for years here in our church, to where when you have been given the information, the know-how, the knowledge, skills, and abilities in order to be able to accomplish something, and you decide that you would rather settle for less or settle for whatever program that you have. I'm going to go ahead and push these buttons now. That, and as a pastor, I deal with this on a regular basis with our people. Here I am. I'm showing you an example of who you and what you can be, and how I did not start off working at Amazon or being in cloud technology and things like nature, or master's degree, all the other stuff. I didn't start off that way. I grew up in 1436 West 10th Street, Jacksonville, Florida, 32225, and didn't have a lot. We had a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, and there's 5 of us. We had a furnace that didn't work, and so that I came through that entire experience, and I know that there's people who grew up in the same environment that I did, and this is the part that irks me. Both of us had 2-parent households. Both of us grew up in the hood. Both of us had access to the same information. Both of us went through a lot of trials and tests and what have you, Both of us got tattoos. I'm just talking about my friends and things of that nature. But why is it that that you're going to persecute me for wanting to do well? Or why are you coming at me and saying, okay, why do you talk white? He used to say that to us all when we were growing up, because my mom was a speech pathologist. And so at the end of the day, what I found out is this, and this is the reason why even my approach when it comes to ministry is not to give somebody everything, not to just pay everybody's rent, not to just do this or that or whatever. I want to, as the scripture says, teach a person how to fish versus just giving them a fish. I don't want to give you money in order for you to buy lottery tickets, because that's a poverty mindset. You may win, you may hit a lick, and then that's it. And then I have to deal with that as a pastor, to where people want to get as much from the church as possible, but only support the church with $1. Whereas the U.S. government, they take 28 to 35% from out of your check, and then you're looking around and talking about, what are they doing for me? So it's a very, very difficult type of situation when it comes to situations like that, to where you tell people that they can be great and great and great and great, but then they just go right back and be like, I can't receive any of that. But if I talk about Boosie and, I talk about cuss words, or I get a little fleshly in the pulpit, or I dance and I joke, everybody laughing up. But then when I start talking about excellence in African history, about Athanasius, Origen, and all of these African scholars that are in the first century, and how they really helped shape the Christian faith, and not what happened over the slave ships, it's just like they turned the situation off. And then they say, well, I can't understand why we can't get ahead. We just need to come together. But the truth of the matter is, and I close, is that I see this so often, and it's just exhausted to me. I just don't understand why black people can't get together, why we can't get together. And part of it is that even when we came over here, there's always been this element of tribalism. You have some people that want to do well and they want to do great in life, but then you have other people that still sell others into slavery. Both exist. And some people want to perpetuate that victimization. Hey, I feel comfortable staying where I'm at, because to do good, nah. And then they'll say bougie. But no, if I'm trying to teach you, I'm trying to help you, you don't want my help, then I got to move on to the next person.
Yeah, I just want to tell you folks that are here tonight from Divine Truth, you have a great pastor who loves you, and I'm honored to be able to serve in the same community along with you, Pastor Andre. I was thinking about this question, and I think speaking to people in my context, white brothers and sisters, there absolutely needs to be a recognition of folks that are victims and folks that are suffering, that we need to be compassionate and aware of the privilege that does exist, to be able to come alongside, and I love, Pastor Andre, even your practical comment of talk and engage with folks that are different from you in order to understand and share, and that's going to be one of my challenges as we close, to share the commonalities. But my encouragement, as much as possible, is, so on one sense, it's a recognition of, okay, there is victimhood that's occurring, and I'm part of the problem, to recognize that. And then the second part of that goes back to the habitat, which is the call, like, I want good for my brothers and sisters that are of a minority, a different, from a different place than I am. And so I love Pastor Andre's call and his challenge to say, like, let's go, let's move this ship forward. And I 100% want to be and am on board with you in that endeavor. And so excited to just kind of learn and grow. How can I be a part of making sure and helping raise awareness to victimization, but then also gently calling and encouraging folks to move forward.
Yeah, but I think that it's kind of like some people, they are afraid of success. It's like having a glass refrigerator full of food, and there's no lock on it, but you've been told that you can't open it up. But you really can. And so I think that it's, and that's what I'm all about. I'm all about empowerment. Never before have I seen so many people of color start their own businesses. So if they're not going to hire you, what are you going to do? Just sit there and cry? No, start your own business. But it's hard, Pastor Martin. I don't have thousands of dollars. Yes, you do. Stop eating out. Stop buying the most expensive shoes, and to stop trying to look as if you have so much money. Save your money. It's a lifestyle change. It's a mindset change that you have to go into. If you really want to be wealthy, be debt free. You'd be a slave to no one in regards to your dollar, but if you got to have that Gucci belt that no one is even looking at, versus a normal belt from Walmart. I learned that many years ago. There used to be this thing when I was growing up called duck head. That's real hood right there, I know. But I used to want some duck head pants like no tomorrow. I even stole some. Let's talk Friday. Because I wanted those things so bad. I wanted the polo shirts, I wanted duck head pants, I wanted Dickies and all those other different types of things. And I found out that and I would ask my mom, I was like, Mom, can I get some duck head pants? Can I get something to wear? And she was like, I don't have it. I was like, I'm so tired of you saying that you don't have it. I'm going to go steal me some, and I did. But I basically said all of that to say this. I learned over the years that, number one, if I'm going to get into a relationship or only going to get approval from people based on my external worth or how much money I have on me, and when I don't have it anymore, then you get away from me, then I don't need to be around you at all.
I actually have a similar story to Pastor Martin with the pants. I didn't steal pants, but this was probably maybe my first semester. As everybody, you received a refund check from school, and it's like it's in a substantial amount. You're like whether if you're like young, you're like 19, 20, you're like, man, I ain't got no bills, no kids, no nothing. So I went. Has everybody been to the Millennium Mall before? And
yes.
All the regular people, we go to the left, to the right side. You got the money, you go to the left side. So just something in me was like, I want to buy myself a Gucci belt. I was like, I need a Gucci belt. And my brother was with me. He was like, why go buy a $400-500 belt when you can go to Walmart and get the same belt? Not even the same belt, but you can get a belt that does the same objective. And I think at that point, my mindset had changed around what was important to me in life. My mindset had changed around, okay, if I spend this $300-400 on this belt, am I going to eat tomorrow? Do I have a meal for the next day? So I think it was important for me when it came to that, when it came to what's important in life. And this doesn't have anything to do with victimization, I promise, but it's okay. But I think at that point I started to change my mindset, and I repeat this quote so much because this is a quote that I tell a lot of my people that I come in contact with when it comes to consulting work. When you change the quality of your mind, your measure of life changes. You start to live a longer life. You start to invest in certain things that you normally wouldn't invest in because now your mindset has changed.
And I would also piggyback upon that if you got the money, spend it. If you can afford it, do it. But if you're trying to decide between a Gucci belt and your lights going on, guess what you're going to do? You need to keep your lights on instead. I want people that are watching online to have this mindset that where when you walk into the room, your greatness makes people uncomfortable. I want to, as a person specifically speaking, I want my black excellence to make you so uncomfortable that you will either stay where you are or you'll come along with me. Let's go to this hill, let's go to this mountain. I'm going to look for all the good things that are in you. We have similar backgrounds, but that's what it is. That's what it is. It's a background. It's not my forefront.
My father-in-law, who's watching, he made me do something really smart. Before I could marry my now wife, he said, you need to go to this financial seminar class. And I agreed. And in the first thing that they said was live like no one else so that later you can live like no one else. And essentially, it's exactly what you guys are sharing, is that to live in an efficient, cautious, thinking about the future way, so that when you are older, you can live like no one else around you. You're not in the debt and the other things. I thought that was great. I probably say that mantra to myself at least once a week of, you're making choices now. When there's that push, that desire, I want to appease the people around me. I want to, get the thing now, whatever it is. But to hold off and think, man, there's something far greater if I just am diligent, work hard. So I love what you guys are sharing. That's great.
And then finally, you want to go on? Okay, and then finally, very briefly, I always think I try to consider myself a deep thinker, sometimes too much. And I always wonder, what kind of conversation is Beyonce and Jay-Z having when it comes to matters like this? The circles that they're around, what are their conversations like? I can tell you, even though I'm not in that circle, probably several circles below that, but I can tell you that when you start having a better mindset and you have the economics to follow you, the way that people perceive you and the way that you perceive yourself starts changing. When I was younger, I was much more militant, much more forthright, much more it's us versus them, and I'm trying to fight the power. Fight the powers that be. I used to listen to Public Enemy until my ears bled, and I used to watch Can't Trust This, and I used to watch those videos. It used to make me so enraged in the way that we used to do it in our neighborhood, is that we saw a white person walking down the street just out of nowhere going to a friend's house. Then a group of us would go up and we would start fighting them, try to beat the living daylights out of him, to pay him back for 400 years of oppression. That's the other side. And it happened a lot. That's like a little bit of the dark side. So at the end of the day, I think that people are becoming whatever they will be, one choice at a time. And you're a sum total of the choices that you make. And every time you say but, you negate everything else that you've got going on. So yes, there's white privilege, but I know that I can start a business. Yes, there's people who may not like me because of my race, creed, or color, but I know that there's people who do love me. Yes, there's people who are not getting jobs because of what X, Y, or Z. Well, let me go ahead and start a business. Instead of running up my credit card to buy a Gucci belt, I'm gonna run up my credit card to try to get this loan so that I can start, open up a business and start employing people instead.
I feel like Gucci's taking a big hit tonight. Everybody's watching. Watch out, Gucci stock. It's going down.
And I love their clothes too, and I love their hats, by the way.
Okay, well, I think this is a good stopping point for an intermission. So if you want to take a couple of minutes to go stretch or go to the restroom, now's the time to do so. That includes you guys as well. Started.
I said if we keep going to like 9 or so.
They're gonna be watching me from here.
Don't stay up
Okie dokie. So we can go ahead and get started. So kind of moving into our Q&A session. If anyone has questions, you can go ahead and come up, or I can come to you, and then you can ask them, and then our panelists will answer them. Or I have more questions for them as well. So does anyone have any questions?
How you guys doing?
Hi.
Name is Sam. This is actually going to go back to the question in regards to, I guess, white privilege. And the reason I asked that question is just based on your responses. I want to kind of get an understanding of what you guys define as privilege. So how would you define privilege?
The benefit of the doubt on a regular basis. And maybe the way that I was raised has hardened me over the years. My dad, he marched with Martin Luther King. Did I say Martin Luther King?
We got you though.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying. And yeah, and so maybe it's the way that I was raised. Being the oldest, my mom always called me being a trailblazer, and I guess I was just more of like a hardened type person to really develop a thick skin. But primarily, it's just the benefit of the doubt. Do I still see people clutching their purses? Yes, when I walk by. And part of me is like, man, I don't want your purse. I could buy your purse. 15 of them. But then at the other part of me says, you know what? It's still the root of racism is really pride, refusal to apologize or to empathize with another individual, a lack of love. That's really what it all comes down to. So once again, to answer your question, as far as the context of that, it's just basically having the benefit of the doubt. Do I still feel knots in my stomach when I go through Neiman Marcus? Yes. Do I still feel knots in my stomach when I go through Macy's? I don't know, not so much. Macy's is kind of been on a little bit of decline. I feel a little bit more comfortable in there now. Do I know what it feels like to walk through Dillard's and then all of a sudden you see all these plainclothes people start walking around? Yeah, as opposed to maybe when I see another nuclear family of a different persuasion walk through and no one even talks to them, or everybody just comes hand and foot saying, hey, how you doing? And so that is my observation. I'm very aware of it. However, what I have done to circumvent that is to get to know people. And the very person that it is ignoring me because they don't think I have any money because of the way that I'm dressed, I go up and I carry on a conversation with them. I let them know who I am. And whether they care or not, I just want to educate them, and then I move on to the next person.
I think I would define privilege as access to resources, to just build off what Pastor Martin was saying, with safety and security being a resource in that case. So privilege means for me that you would be able to enter a space, that you would be able to get access to financial resources, all of those different levels, and that you wouldn't have to question whether or not somebody would think that you are less deserving because of your race, because of your ethnicity, because of your gender or sexuality or anything like that. So privilege allows you access to those resources without a second guess, which speaks a little bit to conversations about intersectionality, which we've kind of touched on tonight without really defining it, where we were talking before about class and things like that. Even though those things compound to create different circumstances for you, the fact that race stands out even in circumstances of intersectionality that clearly define who has power and who doesn't, I still think that's an issue of access to resources.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Sam. And I think what's so frustrating about that word, and not just the word, but the reality of it is it's assumptions being made, and sort of labels being placed that have nothing to do with the person. And that's why I just think over and over again, Pastor Andre, when you're talking about knowing people, that breaks a lot of that down. If you don't know someone and you just assume things about them because of what media has said or what you've been told, just false assumptions that are made. And so for the history of this country, since its founding, there's been a certain sense in which there's assumptions that if you are of a white man or woman, that there are just some things that are natural born rights. Megan mentioned the never having to question your status, your place. That's an example of privilege. It's just that's not even crosses most white people's minds. And so, again, that's not intentionally or an action taking place necessarily, but it's just almost like a state of being. And so I think defining it, highlighting it, discussing it is really helpful to note that there is a separation there, and why white privilege is a thing. It is a reality.
I agree. I agree with everyone else's. I don't know how much I can really add on to that as far as what privilege is, but as Megan mentioned, I do believe that privilege is not without a reasonable doubt, regardless of how I look, how I'm shaped, what language I speak, that I have access to it. And I agree with Pastor Martin and Pastor Drew as far as being able to address what privilege is and how we can better educate individuals on what privilege is and how we're able to change and shape it and format it.
I got a question. What do you do when you have access? You know, after you get the access, like access to what? Once you get the access, then what? Because I know people who have access but won't do anything.
I think when it comes to just my personal aspect of when I receive access to something, one is number one important me. Why did I receive this access? Two, how can I better address it and hold on to it? Because we can have access to so many different things. Is how long can we hold on to it and make utilization of it, and then be able to pull up the individual behind us to give them that same access. So I think it's also more so when we get that access, it's almost changing how it's all about our mindset. Our mindset is something that I try to teach even the young people who come behind me. I have nieces and nephews. I say, change your mindset. When you change your mindset and when you get that access to those things that you want to obtain, then you can then go behind and you say, hey, look, I received this access from somewhere. I'm going to show you how to get it, and I'm going to show you how to hold on to it, because that's the number one important thing. I think it's important to our community is how can we hold on to this access that we have now received, and how can we be able to enhance it.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off that. I think that's really important that when you have access, you expand it. It makes me think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So she gets a lot of praise for her rulings and her opinions, but it's also pointed out on the back end that she has historically not hired any significant amount of non-white people onto her staff, right? So when you have a voice or when you have power, then it's extending opportunity. So if you're able to hire people and give them a greater voice and greater power and greater wealth, you do that. When you're able to create venues to give people voice, even thinking to like medical research, most medical research is centered around whiteness. Most statistics are centered around whiteness. So then you bring in people with diverse perspectives who are able to collect information that is more generalizable to the public rather than centered around one voice and one part of power.
Thank you for your response. It's very informative here. In terms of, the past is the past, right? We can't really go back in time. So moving forward in terms of policies, in terms of assisting with kind of, bridging that gap for equity or equality, whichever you believe in, do you find yourself supporting more race-neutral approaches or race-conscious approaches? Because everyone has their varying opinion in how to go about tackling this. So what would you guys be perspective beyond that type of policy making?
Well, I think policy is driven by the heart. There's an old, even though I'm a pastor, I'm very in tune with what goes on in politics, even though I don't say much about it. And something that I heard that was very wise from someone many years ago, they said, you can't legislate morality and you can't legislate good behavior. You can put policies in place, but if the heart is not in it, then it's good on paper, but then you still get the behaviors and you still get the treatment that's not illegal. You know, the way that I treat you, if I turn my nose up to you and just turn away and don't speak to you, there could be a policy in place, but it still won't have any effect. So what I would say is I believe in the Eastern mindset versus the Western mindset of just seeing things in black and white by saying both and. You can do both and. Specifically speaking, I think that there's some things that are neutral, certain principles that are neutral, making the right choices, surrounding yourself with people who will push you, not having a poverty mindset. My mom used to make us read books about that on a regular basis because my mother came from 8 children. She saw 4 of her brothers and sisters die. And she was the very first one to go to college in her family. She went to the University of Florida. And so when she talks with me, she says, I don't want to hear you make any excuses. You know how hard I had. So as a result of that, I want you to continue to push forward. Here are these extenuating circumstances. My dad, he went to Purdue University. Back in the 70s, he wanted to commit suicide while he was in college because of those extenuating circumstances. And so those things end up shaping me. I'm like, I'm not going to let anything hold me back. And so that's why I have 2 sides. One side is neutral because I believe that people are people. And just as Pastor Drew said, there are certain things that a lot of white people are just not thinking about. They're just trying to live. And then what I found out when I matriculate to some of those circles is that some of them don't like each other either. I see Desperate Housewives, and I see how that goes. And I see Friends and how that goes. But then I also see Duck Dynasty and how that goes. And how they treat each other in those circles. I see how the liberal elite acts, and I also see how the liberal conservatives act. And how they treat each other. And then I found out that oftentimes they're not even thinking about certain things. So that's one side. So there's a neutral part. But then there's also not dismissing the fact that I am a black man. And I love my people. I got a chocolate wife. And we've been together for 20 years. And I want to be a person in this community that is a beacon and a light to others and is trying to help push others forward, even at my own expense. And I want people to feel proud when they walk through those doors. And if you're a white person that walks through the doors during Black History Month and you hear about Augustine of Hippo, then you should also be proud as well that, hey, they're really learning something in there, and they're just not foaming at the mouth and rolling over, and they don't have to dismiss their minds. Or when you walk through our church, it's not that religion is a crutch and an opiate at the masses, like Karl Marx and Nietzsche used to say. It's all about empowerment, and so I believe it can be both and. I can be neutral, but I also want to help pull others up. In closing, I had a photo when I was in college. It was a piece of artwork called "He Ain't Heavy." Anybody familiar with that? Well, it was a black man that was reaching over a wall, no shirt on, and there was a hand that was reaching up, and he was basically reaching over like this with his hand down. And it said, "He's not heavy." And that has been my approach to ministry and to dealing with people. I have no problem. I'm not going to tell Pastor Drew, hey, you can't come in my circle, but I just wanted to let you know that this is my agenda. And I believe that you can walk and chew gum at the same time.
I think for me to answer your question, Sam, that from my perspective, I think that there's an equitable approach that makes more sense than whether or not it's race-centric, how you kind of phrase the question. I think it's about more of like a statistical approach, right? You would have voices at the table that represent the population that you are addressing. Or if you have an outstanding issue in your community, you would represent the voices that's most affecting. So Pastor brought up suicidality, which is, I've been in the field for 10 years, and there's this really kind of crazy thing that happens in that field where you have sympathy if you know someone who died, but if you've ever been suicidal, if you're ever struggling with your mental health, there's really not a space for you to have a voice in that arena. And it's interesting that a lot of the research that is backing suicidality comes from interviews of people who knew someone. Even though there are people surviving and struggling right now, those voices are not at the table. They're not informing policy. They're not informing tools that we're using to assess suicidality in a medical perspective, things like that. So every voice that is highly affected should be at least equitably represented at the table in order to make a policy that makes sense for everybody. And then probably the second option piece of that is anytime you do any level of research or policy, there's a lot of studies out there that show that it doesn't translate into practical action because there's a gap in, I don't want to say literacy in terms of reading, but in terms of understanding how statistics generalize into our everyday lives. So you have to have the back end as well of people educating and bringing awareness so that you know how is this new policy, no matter how equitable or not it is, going to affect my day to day. And if it doesn't work for me, what can I do to work against it at that point? And so those systems need to be equitable as well, that you can still have a voice whether you're at the table or not.
Did anyone else have a question? Okay, cool. Thank you for your question, Sam. Okay, so to wrap up our night, my last question is and it's for everyone to answer, is what can we do to further elevate the dialogue and keep the conversation going about important topics?
I'll share. So obviously, I think something that's been highlighted multiple times is just the importance of hearing others at the table, right? As Megan said, putting yourself in a position to identify that we were talking about during the break that your unique perspective does not reflect the perspective of everyone. And so identifying that people, and that's the beauty of my faith, that is that God created each of us with dignity, with worth, with value, and made us each unique. And so that's part of we didn't get to the media representation, but one of the things I wanted to highlight is that I love now watching videos, listening to podcasts, reading books from diverse authors, because there's just so many stories that need to be told that have not, there's not been a platform or a privilege to share those stories. So my encouragement is, while you can't inspire change, everything okay?
Yes.
Okay. While you can't, or I should say, you can't legislate change, as Pastor mentioned on the previous question, you can't change someone's heart. You can inform and hopefully inspire. And so my encouragement is be informed. Pursue really by listening, not trying to come for, I mean, tonight, I feel like I've talked way too much. My goal was not to come in here and talk and give answers. It was really to learn and to come alongside brothers and sisters and hear about what your experiences have been. And it's been really encouraging and helpful. So that's my encouragement. Learn, be educated, but more than that, really seek to not just obtain information, but seek to know somebody. And I think you'll actually learn to love them in the process.
I agree with Pastor Drew when it's bringing somebody with you. I think it's extremely important if you're a part of a conversation or if you're being a part of a movement or something great in your community. I think it's important to bring someone with you. So that's how I think you can keep this conversation going. One, these kind of moments are super important. Especially when you hold them in church, because when you go to other events and when you go to other places, not a lot of people come. And like as Pastor Martin mentioned before, it's like pulling teeth to even get people to come into the room. So even in the midst of getting people, even in the midst of having a challenge of getting people in the room, I still think it's important to just even let somebody know, say, hey, we're having this conversation tonight, and I really want you to come there and learn, but also receive information, but also to give information, because we learn from each other. We are a growing community of individuals where we can learn so much from one another. We just don't talk. And when we don't talk, we run into this brick wall where we can't get through, and we're just pushing our way. So I think it's extremely important that we always that we bring somebody with us, but also bring somebody up with us.
That's great. And I love the feedback from everyone on this panel in a respectful manner. I guess in closing, I really value these conversations, how to keep things moving forward, is really embrace diversity. And I think diversity has to go beyond a spectrum of what you look like, but more so a spectrum of what people think. And I really value that. People always like to lift the eyebrow when I say I listen to Rush Limbaugh. I listen to Rush Limbaugh. I watch and I listen to Glenn Beck, Red State. I also watch Democracy Now!, Young Turks, a lot of the nice little channels. Used to frequent Democratic Underground online, Daily Kos, a lot of things that I picked up, and just to see how people are thinking. And so I believe that discussions like this will be fruitful by having people that have sharp and differing opinions, and people not apologizing for what they are or who they are. If people don't agree, I think that's really, really good. Let's disagree and commit to that, and I think that'll be great. So, Rush Limbaugh, if you're listening, if you're listening today, or somebody from the more conservative element that's watching today, come on through. Let's talk about these ideas, and let's be like James Baldwin and some other individuals that are in the past that have spoken about specific things and had different types of ideas, like William F. Buckley and James Baldwin, how they debated with each other, but they still had a respectful tone with each other. Those are some titans in regards to the way that we think and the way that we see things today. And so let's continue to do that.
And I think what you find in that is that you actually have a lot more in common than you think, right? There's so many walls gone up against where it's like, oh, you look differently than me. We make assumptions about one another and therefore think, oh, we have nothing in common. But the reality is that you can actually identify. I mean, some of my very best friends I met in the most random ways, but that's the beauty of how we were made. And so, Jonathan, your comment: keep talking, keep the conversation moving, and pull somebody in with you to have that conversation. I appreciate it.
I love talking with people that do not agree with me. I love it. I love jousting. I love debates. I think that there should be more of those. I think that we should always see things in the arena of ideas. It helps broaden your perspective, see things from an international point of view. You got to have thick skin. I think that's a wonderful thing. And so you keep on doing what you're doing. To those of you that are watching, make sure that you come. The next time we have these conversations, get from behind those devices, put those phones down, and let's talk one-on-one, and let's not get trapped into memeology or selecting a friends list that only reinforces what we already believe. All right, let's pop that bubble.
Megan?
I see you looking at me like you want me to answer the question. Actually, I agree. I agree with what a lot of what has been said. A lot of introspection, I think, is required to be able to understand what makes you uncomfortable and why, and to be able to confront that in a constructive way. And just a plug for the area that we live in is you can go to, in the same weekend, like a Haitian cultural festival, a Puerto Rican cultural, you can go and experience all these different types of environments and cultures and cinema and art and everything that maybe you weren't aware of before. You can even be a passive consumer of that in the beginning if you're uncomfortable, and it still allows you to elevate yourself and your level of education, and then to eventually, have a conversation with somebody. So I think that's really important. And then I'm a huge proponent of just storytelling and sharing your personal story and building empathy for whatever cause that is. So for that, I think social media is really important, that you can give yourself a voice whether you have a platform or not. So being able to put something like this even online is, I think, really important. So I was even telling Pastor Drew over the break, it's really important that anybody who does have a voice take whatever they do learn and spread that with people that they trust when it can be constructive for them. So all in all, I think everything that's happening tonight is really positive.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being a part of this event and for volunteering your time. Are there any last minute comments or questions from the audience? Okay, cool, awesome. Okay, so that's really all that we have for tonight. Thank you so much for coming. And I think my last words of wisdom is to always have uncomfortable conversations until they become comfortable, and just to continue elevating the dialogue. So, yes, that's it. Have a good night.
My